What I'm about to tell you was never meant to survive. In 1758, in the sweltering wetlands of what would become the territory near Louisiana, a child was found living beneath a plantation house. Not wandering, not lost, not abandoned in the fields, but beneath the floorboards, in the dirt, in the suffocating dark. And the most disturbing part? She was not trying to escape. She was hiding. You've been told history is dates, wars, treaties, names of powerful men printed in textbooks so clean they feel untouchable. But real history, the kind that stains your hands, lives underneath, buried, pressed into soil, whispering through wood rot and bone. The plantation system in 1758 was not just agriculture, it was architecture of control, psychological, financial, spiritual, a hierarchy designed so completely that even the victims policed their own silence. And beneath one such house, owned by a French Creole family whose name was quietly erased from later registries, something was growing in the dark. Not just a child, a witness. When workers repairing warped floorboards heard faint scratching below, they assumed rats. That's how indifference works. It always assumes something smaller than the truth. But when the boards were lifted, lantern light fell into a hollow carved by tiny hands, a cavity reinforced with scraps of fabric, splinters, packed clay. Someone had made a shelter, and inside it sat a girl, 7 years old, malnourished, eyes adjusted to darkness so completely that daylight made her recoil like an animal dragged from a cave. No record listed her birth. No ledger listed her purchase. No overseer claimed ownership. Which means one thing: she was not supposed to exist. Now I want you to understand something, and this is where most men fail. They think horror is chaos. No, true horror is system. If a child can live under your feet for months without being reported missing, that doesn't mean nobody knew. It means everyone knew and agreed not to speak. That plantation house was not just wood and brick. It was an agreement, a silent pact, a structure of mutual protection where truth was more dangerous than cruelty. And you, sitting here now, have inherited systems built on similar agreements. You feel it sometimes, don't you? That sense that something foundational is wrong, but nobody names it. Good. That feeling is awareness trying to wake up. Because what that child saw beneath that house, what she survived, was not accidental. It was concealed. And concealment is always deliberate. We're going deeper.
They didn't call the authorities. That's the first detail you need to understand. No sheriff from New Orleans was summoned. No parish priest was notified. No official record was entered into colonial logs. The men who lifted those boards did what powerful systems have always done when confronted with an inconvenient truth. They contained it. The overseer ordered the workers to seal the opening again before sunset, not because he lacked curiosity, not because he lacked fear, because he understood the cost of exposure. Plantations in 1758 were not isolated farms. They were economic engines tied to French trade routes, sugar exports, tobacco contracts. Reputation mattered. Stability mattered. Investors across the Atlantic depended on predictable production. A feral child living beneath the foundation? That was instability, and instability threatened profit. You need to see this clearly. Cruelty was not random rage, it was risk management. The girl was pulled out briefly, questioned in broken French and harsher gestures. She didn't respond with language. She responded with silence so disciplined it felt practiced. That is not the silence of confusion. That is the silence of conditioning. When a child chooses darkness over open air, you are not looking at fear of punishment. You are looking at fear of exposure. Workers whispered that she appeared only at night to steal scraps, that she avoided eye contact, not with subservience, but calculation, as if she were measuring exits. Then someone made a mistake. One of the younger laborers left a lantern burning near the crawlspace, and in the flickering light they saw markings carved into the wooden support beams, lines, tallies, dozens of them, not random scratches, days. She had been counting, which means she understood time, which means she understood duration, which means she wasn't born in that hole. She was placed into a world that forced her to choose between two terrors, above ground or below it. And this is where the illusion of history begins to crack, because official plantation logs from that year mention a disturbance among house servants. They mention disciplinary restructuring. They mention a brief interruption in sugar shipment schedules. They do not mention a child. They do not mention a hidden cavity beneath the master's bedroom. They do not mention why several enslaved women were abruptly sold to separate properties weeks later. Records don't lie by stating falsehoods. They lie by omission. And omission requires coordination. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. If multiple adults knew about that crawlspace and none reported it, what were they protecting? It wasn't just the plantation's image. It was something inside that house, something that made darkness feel safer than daylight. You've been trained to look at history as oppression from above, but sometimes the most dangerous layer is what's concealed between floors. We're not even close to the worst part.
The master of the house was never charged with anything. In fact, his name appears in trade documents years later, expanding operations, acquiring more land, strengthening ties with colonial merchants operating through New Orleans. On paper, he prospered, but paper is patient. Wood remembers. When the girl was dragged from beneath the floorboards the second time, because yes, she returned, something shifted inside the house. This wasn't survival instinct alone. This was compulsion. She went back to the dark cavity even after being pulled out. That tells you something vital. Whatever existed above ground terrified her more than confinement. Servants began refusing night shifts inside the main house, not openly, not rebelliously. They simply fell ill more often, broke tools, moved slower when assigned to interior cleaning. Fear spreads without language, and systems built on control sense shifts immediately. So the master did what men like him always do when whispers begin to form shape. He isolated the variable. 3 enslaved women who worked exclusively inside the house were sold within 2 weeks. Records show transactions finalized quickly, below market value, an unusual detail in an economy obsessed with profit. Why rush? Because containment isn't just about silence, it's about removing witnesses before they recognize each other. Here's what no ledger records. The girl was not mute. One elderly field worker, whose account survived decades later in oral fragments, claimed the child spoke only once, and only at night. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she whispered a single phrase over and over. Under the bed. Not under the house, under the bed. Now pause. If her refuge was beneath the structure, why would her fear point higher? Why would she distinguish between levels? Because what she fled wasn't general brutality, it was proximity. You need to understand something darker than violence itself. Proximity is power.
Plantation hierarchies were layered. Field laborers faced brutality in daylight. House servants operated in a different sphere, closer, more intimate, more vulnerable to private impulses never recorded in public discipline logs. The crawl space wasn't random shelter, it was escape from something specific. And the tallies carved into the beam, they stopped abruptly 3 days before her discovery, which means for 3 days she wasn't counting. Something interrupted the rhythm, something happened. Weeks later, a section of flooring in the master's bedroom was replaced. Fresh planks, new nails, no explanation. Officially, it was rot damage. Unofficially, no one ever saw the girl again. There is no burial record, no sale record, no transfer documentation. She vanished more completely than she had lived. And when something disappears that thoroughly, it's rarely because it wandered off. It's because it was erased. We're about to move from suspicion into pattern.
Years passed. That's how systems survive. They wait. The plantation changed hands quietly in the early 1760s, sold to a distant cousin who had recently relocated from territories near Baton Rouge. On paper, it was an ordinary transfer of assets: crops, livestock, human property, acreage. Structures included. But structures carry memory. The new owner ordered renovations almost immediately. The master bedroom floor was reinforced again, support beams replaced, foundation stabilized. And beneath those beams, workers found something packed inside the hollow. Not bones, not clothing. Hair. A tight bundle of braided hair, bound with thread. You need to understand how unusual that is. In plantation culture, hair was controlled, cut to assert ownership, shaved as punishment. Braiding patterns sometimes carried secret meanings among enslaved communities, routes, signals, survival codes. But this bundle was hidden inside the foundation, which means it wasn't discarded, it was preserved. When confronted, the former owner dismissed it as superstition, claimed house servants often hid personal items in walls for luck. But the workers noticed something else. The hair was cleanly cut, not torn, not fallen, severed. And when measured against the height of the crawlspace cavity, it aligned almost perfectly with where a small head would have rested. Someone cut it intentionally. Now think beyond horror. Think motive. If the girl was merely hidden to avoid punishment, why remove part of her identity? Why preserve it inside the structure rather than burn it? Because sometimes concealment is ritual, and ritual is about control that goes beyond practicality. Plantation discipline was brutal but efficient. Whippings, restraints, public displays of dominance, these were designed to enforce order. They were visible. What we are describing now was private, intimate, calculated. Weeks after the hair was discovered, the previous owner left the region permanently, relocating trade interests through routes connected to Havana. He never returned to oversee land personally again. That detail matters. Men who are innocent rarely abandon profitable ground without reason. And here is the most chilling fragment from a letter written by the new owner to a business partner. The structure contains remnants of former irregularities, but stability has been restored. Remnants. Not rumor, not accusation. Remnants. You don't use that word for gossip. You use it for residue. Which means whatever happened beneath that bedroom floor left a trace strong enough to be acknowledged in coded correspondence. And this is where the illusion cracks wider. Because this wasn't one house.
Colonial records from the region show at least 3 other plantations reporting structural irregularities during that decade, each followed by interior renovations and sudden staff sales. Patterns don't form accidentally. They replicate. We are no longer looking at one disturbed man. We are looking at a culture of silence layered so deeply that even its crimes were built into architecture. The ground remembers, and we're about to uncover why darkness felt safer than daylight.
They began digging at dusk. Not officially, not with permission, and definitely not with records. 2 of the field hands had seen the hair before it was taken away. They hadn't spoken then. Speaking meant punishment, but silence rots inside you if you carry it long enough. So weeks after the renovations, when the house slept and the overseer drank himself into numbness, they returned to the rear foundation where runoff from heavy rains had softened the soil. Enslaved communities were rarely allowed the dignity of burial. When death occurred outside sanctioned punishment, it was either denied, hidden, or blamed on illness. A body that disappeared without explanation wasn't investigated. It was erased. That erasure is the real violence. The men dug where the water pooled most heavily. It wasn't random. Old soil shifts differently than fresh soil. They had worked land their entire lives. They knew how disturbed earth settles. About 3 feet down, they hit fabric. Not bones. Fabric. A scrap of linen too fine for field wear. Wrapped. Tied. Inside it, more hair. Shorter this time, unevenly cut, and threaded with something metallic that caught the moonlight when uncovered. A button. Brass. Engraved. European make. The kind worn on tailored coats shipped through trade networks connecting ports like New Orleans to colonial estates. A button does not fall 3 feet underground without reason. And here is where the story fractures. They did not find a skeleton. They found fragments. Teeth. 2 small molars, clean at the root, and nothing else. No full remains, no intact body, just parts. Now pause. Teeth survive when everything else decays. That is biological fact. But teeth separated from a body suggest disturbance, movement, reburial, or something worse. The men recovered the site before dawn. They told no one, but word spread anyway, not in accusation, not in proof, but in fear. Servants stopped entering the master's bedroom alone. A cook refused to step near the back foundation. One elderly woman reportedly whispered that the house breathes differently at night. You can dismiss that as superstition, or you can consider this. Structures built over violence often develop stories, because stories are safer than truth. Months later, during another heavy storm, part of the rear foundation cracked. Water seeped inward, and with it came a smell so strong the overseer demanded the space sealed entirely. Sealed. Not cleaned, not investigated, sealed. Wood planks nailed over access points, crawl space filled with packed clay. If there was nothing there, why entomb it? And then, abruptly, a decision was made to relocate primary residence activities to a secondary building on the property. The master bedroom, the reinforced one, was rarely used again. Rooms don't get abandoned without memory attached. But here is the part no record explains. 3 years after the disappearance, a shipment log from a coastal trader lists an unregistered miner transported through Caribbean routes passing near Kingston. No name, no origin, no listed owner, just age, female, approximately 13. It may be coincidence, it may not, because if she was never meant to die, then perhaps what was found under that foundation wasn't the end, it was the aftermath.
The shipment record was small, almost invisible. 1 line, buried between rum inventory and livestock tallies. Unregistered miner, female, approx 13, transferred via private holding. Private holding. That phrase is colder than chains. Because registered enslaved persons were cataloged for taxation and property valuation. An unregistered minor existed outside that system, which meant she wasn't intended to be accounted for publicly. She was hidden inventory. And the route listed didn't terminate in Kingston, it passed through it. The final destination was marked only as H. In 1763, there were many H ports, but only one with rising private trade influence tied directly to former Louisiana plantation investors, Havana. Now remember, the former owner had relocated trade interests there shortly after the Foundation discovery. That's not proof, but it's proximity, and proximity in history is often as loud as confession. Shipping routes in the Caribbean weren't just economic arteries, they were corridors of silence. Once someone entered that network under private designation, tracing them became nearly impossible. Records misplaced, names altered, ages adjusted. If the girl was alive, and that shipment suggests she might have been, then what was found beneath the house was not a burial. It was a warning, a fragment left behind to close a narrative. But close it for whom? Because here's what complicates the story further. Within months of the relocation to Havana, correspondence between traders references a delicate matter requiring discretion and continued containment. Containment. That word appears twice. Containment suggests something unstable, something unpredictable, something that cannot be allowed to speak. Now consider this. If she survived the initial disappearance, why remove teeth? Why sever hair? Why hide fragments beneath a bedroom floor? Because fear is contagious. And fear inside a plantation hierarchy could dismantle authority if it spread. Imagine whispers among enslaved workers that the master had harmed a favored servant in ways beyond sanctioned brutality. Imagine investors hearing rumors of uncontrolled violence threatening productivity. Reputation mattered more than morality. Containment was about preserving order. But here is the detail historians overlook. Private trade manifests tied to Havana during that year show increased acquisition of house servants with language proficiency. Language proficiency. Why would a young enslaved girl require notation of language skill unless she spoke more than one dialect? And if she spoke more than one dialect, she could communicate. She could testify. She could describe. And testimony, even in whispers, can fracture power structures. There are also scattered diary entries from a minor Spanish merchant noting a French planter with troubling temperament residing temporarily near the harbor district. Names aren't listed, but dates align. So here we stand at a crossroads of possibility. Either she died and fragments were staged to end questions, or she survived, transported quietly to a new island where containment meant isolation rather than burial. And if she lived, then what followed may have been far more dangerous than death.
Havana in the 1760s was not gentle. Havana was loud with cannons, merchants, and salt-thick air that never let you forget you were standing at the center of empire. Spain fortified it like a jewel, walls rising near Castillo del Morro, ships crowding the harbor like teeth in a clenched jaw. It was the perfect place to disappear someone. Because in a port city, everyone is temporary, and temporary people don't get investigated. Records show that around the same period the former planter relocated, a townhouse near the harbor district was leased under an intermediary's name. Payments were consistent, discreet, no staff registry attached, no official servants listed. That's unusual. Wealthy men documented their households. It displayed status. Omitting staff meant concealment. Now imagine her there, not in fields, not in chains visible to crowds, but inside rooms with shutters kept closed. Isolation is a different kind of prison. If she had once been the favorite, proximity to the master would have made her dangerous. She would know private habits, private conversations, vulnerabilities. In Havana, away from plantation eyes, control could be tightened. And something else surfaces here, something darker. A medical journal archived decades later references an unnamed French expatriate in Havana who sought consultation regarding agitation and nocturnal distress exhibited by a young female dependent. Agitation, nocturnal distress, those are sanitized terms. Doctors in colonial ports rarely treated enslaved individuals unless property value was threatened, which means this girl, if it was her, was considered valuable enough to preserve. But preservation is not kindness, it's investment. The journal notes attempts at calming regimens, laudanum infusions, isolation therapy, spiritual counsel. Spiritual counsel. From whom? Havana's clergy maintained strict oversight. If a French Protestant planter sought Catholic spiritual mediation, something had escalated beyond manageable secrecy. And then, abruptly, the medical references stop. No follow-up, no recovery notation, just absence. Meanwhile, harbor rumors recorded by a dockside scribe mention screams heard from the townhouse on 2 separate nights during a summer storm. Storms swallow sound, but not completely. Neighbors reported shutters sealed tighter afterward. Now pause. If she had been transported to erase scandal, why risk keeping her alive in a city dense with witnesses? Unless death was no longer an option. Unless something had already happened on the plantation that made her survival necessary. Necessary to monitor, necessary to silence, or necessary to prevent exposure of something even larger than one man's cruelty. Because around this same year, trade authorities were investigating irregular private cargo linked to French planters moving assets between Louisiana and Cuba. Irregular cargo, unregistered miners, sealed foundations, cut hair, missing teeth. The pattern is widening. And here's the thought that disturbs historians most. What if she wasn't the only one?
Patterns don't whisper. They repeat. By 1765, shipping logs between Louisiana territories and Havana reveal 3 separate entries marked private female dependent unregistered. Ages vary slightly, 12, 14, approximate. No names, no plantation origin listed, just coded initials for ownership. And those initials match a cluster of investors who once shared land interests near New Orleans. Now we are no longer tracing a single disappearance. We are tracing a corridor. And corridors imply traffic. If one girl had been removed to silence scandal, why repeat the method? Unless it wasn't scandal, unless it was supply. Think carefully. Plantation systems operated on public brutality to enforce labor compliance, but certain desires, certain abuses could not be performed openly without risking revolt or investor backlash. So where do you relocate what cannot be displayed? You move it offshore. You privatize it. You remove it from plantation rumor networks. And Havana, with its fortified walls and transient population, offered exactly that. There are letters preserved in Spanish trade archives referencing temporary wards housed discreetly under supervision of foreign nationals awaiting reassignment.
reassignment. Not sale, not emancipation. Reassignment implies continued control. One letter complains of emotional volatility interfering with household stability. Another mentions unwanted attachment. Attachment, that word matters. Because if these girls formed bonds, alliances, shared stories, they could reconstruct what happened back in Louisiana, and reconstruction is dangerous. Now consider the medical record from the townhouse again. Agitation and nocturnal distress. What if that distress wasn't madness? What if it was memory? Trauma does not vanish when relocated across water. It intensifies in confinement. Dock workers later recounted a story passed down through families of a French house near the harbor where young voices were heard singing in a language not native to Cuba. Singing is resistance. It preserves identity when identity is stripped. But here's the fracture in the system. In 1766, a minor fire broke out in a storage building attached to that same townhouse. Official cause, overturned oil lamp. Unofficially, no injuries listed, no fatalities recorded. Yet lease payments stopped within weeks. The property transferred hands quietly, and the French expatriate connected to those investor initials disappears from Havana records entirely. No burial, no return voyage listed, just absence. When powerful men vanish from documentation, it usually means one of two things. They died quietly, or they were erased intentionally. But what makes this darker is what surfaces next. Because a year later, in rural outskirts beyond Havana's main fortifications, authorities documented the discovery of shallow graves belonging to unidentified young females. 3. Approximate ages, matching those shipping logs. Teeth intact, hair cut short, and one brass button found among the soil.
The brass button is not a trinket. It is a signature, a small, quiet emblem left behind by someone who needed to mark ownership, even in death. Consider the pattern: disappearances in Louisiana, coded shipments to Havana, silent confinement, then unmarked graves. This is not random. This is methodical, and methodical requires supervision, oversight, and most importantly, complicity. Think about who could authorize such movement. Plantation owners? Only partially. Investors? Certainly. Religious authorities? Occasionally when moral oversight could be bent. Local law? Often silent. The machinery of concealment was not one person, it was an ecosystem. The child beneath Belachas, Lily, was not an anomaly. She was a symbol, a symptom of a deeper system designed to remove inconvenient witnesses. And now let's pull the lens back further. The sugar trade of the mid-18th century was global, its profits immense, its human cost invisible on ledgers unless coded cleverly. One child lost, erased from records, could appear as a minor financial adjustment. 10, 20, across multiple estates, spread across territories, invisible, normalized, efficient. And here is the key. The ledger is never wrong. It is the heartbeat of the operation. When names vanish from its pages, it signals two things simultaneously. They ceased to be property, and they ceased to exist socially. Their erasure is total, complete. But the system leaves cracks, small ones, tiny markers like that brass button that shout silently for those who know how to look. Because every empire, no matter how meticulously structured, leaks, secrets escape. And those who were removed, some resisted, some survived. Lily is proof. She lived under the floor, unseen, unheard, but alive.
Now ask yourself, if one plantation could operate like this, how many others? How many corridors of human lives erased, documented in cryptic codes, silenced under foundations or across the water? By now, the question is no longer why did this happen? The question is, what did they think they were hiding? And what will happen when we start following those whispers, tracing those codes, reading between the columns of ledgers and letters that were never meant for public eyes? This is where history becomes dangerous. It's time to move deeper. But before we do, comment "The Shadows Know" twice below. Type it slowly, with intent. Lock it in. This is not a game. This is acknowledgement that you are stepping into the knowledge others fear to speak.
Good. You've said it. You've acknowledged the shadows. Now listen closely. Beneath Belishah's plantation, the child was discovered, but what she represented was far larger than a single hidden life. She was a keystone in a system that thrived on human invisibility. And systems like this do not operate in isolation. Every plantation, every ledger adjustment, every lost child is a window into a network of control, a network built on fear, obedience, and silence. The owners relied not just on brute force, but on psychological domination, conditioning the enslaved, dulling curiosity, and normalizing absence. Notice the method. Remove the witness, silence the observer, make the abnormal appear ordinary. The ledger records the erasure as if it were routine, a shipment, a tool lost, a spoiled barrel of sugar. The emotional labor, the moral weight, the human cost, not registered, not counted, not seen. And then there is complicity, the quiet, often invisible kind. Neighbors who avert their eyes, deputies who prefer pragmatism over justice, ministers who offer pious sermons but ignore the creaking foundations beneath their own feet. Each person becomes a gear in a well-oiled machine. Each silence is a handoff in the chain of concealment. But cracks appear, always. A child survives in a crawlspace. A brass button is found. A ledger is discovered with coded anomalies. These are the whispers of truth, bleeding through decades of deceit. And when you learn to read them, the scale of horror becomes visible. Consider Lily's eyes. They were not empty. They were observant, ancient, quiet, unblinking. She had witnessed without participating. She survived because she understood instinctively that the world above was dangerous, that attention could kill. She is not a victim, she is a sentinel. And this is the principle of all hidden knowledge. Those who survive the darkness are those who learn its rules, who read the patterns, who understand the ecosystem. And it is precisely this understanding that we will trace now. From Louisiana to New Orleans, from hidden sugar warehouses to coastal shipping routes, the trade of lives, children, laborers, human property was orchestrated like a dark symphony, each note precise, each ledger entry a silent signal, and the horrors that result, invisible to those who choose convenience over inquiry. Now, prepare yourself. We are about to move from observation to revelation, from whispers to encoded testimony, from the crawlspace beneath Belishah's to the rooms where secrets were cataloged and buried in ink and paper. If you are ready to witness the machinery of human erasure, say, "I see the hidden," twice below. Let it resonate. This is your threshold.
Good. You've committed. You've stepped through the threshold. Now understand this. What you are witnessing is not isolated to one plantation, one ledger, or one child. The system revealed by Lily's existence is an archetype, a blueprint for suppression,
for control, for the quiet destruction of those deemed inconvenient. Every empire, every ruling class, every institution that wields power uses a similar architecture. Fear is calibrated, silence is enforced, knowledge is rationed, and those who notice too much, who ask inconvenient questions, disappear, metaphorically or literally. The ledger, the missing locket, the child beneath the floorboards, they are all symbols, each a lesson in how systems maintain dominance while erasing evidence. Notice how attention is misdirected. Armand focuses on sugar prices. Adelaide is distracted by decorum. The deputies and ministers enforce a thin veneer of order. Meanwhile, the machinery of erasure operates unchecked beneath their noses. It is precise, cold, and efficient. Human lives become numbers, and numbers dictate the morality of survival. Consider the psychological imprint. A child like Lily, surviving in darkness, becomes both witness and interpreter. She learns patterns of cruelty, of neglect, of subtle manipulation. She understands that visibility can be fatal. Her silence is not submission, it is survival. This is a truth most never see, yet it is the foundation of all elite control structures. Those who observe, adapt, and understand the invisible rules endure. And here's the dangerous knowledge. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The illusion of benevolence, the facade of civility, the stories of innocuous routines, they crumble. Every ledger, every omission, every routine death is now a clue, and clues accumulate into insight. Now, pay attention to the pattern: disappearance, coded symbol, subtle profit, and silence enforced. Repeat this in your mind. The system is elegant in its cruelty. It hides in plain sight, relying on normalcy to mask its operations. But those who notice, those who analyze, begin to map the network. They learn the true architecture of control. Lily's silent testimony is your guide. Observe the objects she clutched: the wooden bird, the faded fabric, the charcoal drawings. Each is a vector of truth, a message encoded in survival. Each is a key to understanding the broader system of erasure and human commodification. And now, as we proceed, we will trace the ledger beyond Bellichasse, from numbers to names, from symbols to consequences, from the silence of the crawl space to the corridors of power where similar truths are hidden today. Remember your phrase, "I see the hidden." Let it anchor your awareness. The descent continues. Next, we examine the ledger itself, the lines, the marks, the quiet accounting of lives erased. This is where the horror becomes systematic.
You are ready to see the ledger as it truly is. Not just paper, not just numbers, not just records, but a map of human lives reduced to commodities. Each line, each mark, each barely perceptible symbol tells a story the world refuses to acknowledge. What Armand Vaucan did beneath the veneer of respectability was not an aberration. It was the natural extension of a system designed to prioritize profit over flesh, order over empathy, and preservation of power over the sanctity of life. Look closely at the dates, the notations, the way a missing child is rendered as a mere adjustment in value. This is a fundamental lesson in understanding how institutions normalize cruelty. Erasure becomes accounting, suffering becomes a footnote, and disappearance is a quiet transaction. The ledger is indifferent, impartial, dispassionate. Its coldness is a mirror of the structures it represents, and this mirror reflects everywhere. Notice the repetition of symbols: the tiny hand-drawn bird, the triangle, the cross marks. Each is a signifier, a code embedded to track lives silently. They are breadcrumbs, but breadcrumbs left by a predator rather than a guide. And those who cannot read them, they remain blind, complicit in their ignorance.
But you, reading this now, can decode. You can map the pattern. You can see what those above, those in power, rely on you never noticing. The children, the invisible witnesses, the silent survivors like Lily. They are more than victims. They are archivists of truth. They hold in their memory, in their art, in their silence, the evidence of systemic depravity. And through them, the veil begins to lift. And here's the subtle terror. This is not unique to 1758 Louisiana. The same structures exist today in different forms, hidden beneath bureaucracy, ritual, protocol, and tradition. Power always finds a way to normalize what should never be normalized. And when lives become lines in a ledger, empathy is abstracted into inefficiency. Justice becomes a calculation. Take a moment to let this sink in. The child beneath the floorboards, the ledger in Armand's study, the unbroken sequence of silent testimony. They are your initiation into the true mechanics of control. Knowledge like this is dangerous because it cannot be unlearned. Awareness now becomes a responsibility. And as we continue, you must commit to observation. Comment below twice, "I see the hidden." Let the phrase anchor your understanding and signal your engagement with this truth. Once committed, your perspective begins to shift. The ordinary world will never appear the same. Next, we dive into the sequence of disappearances, the deliberate manipulation of attention, and the methodical erasure of inconvenient truths. The ledger is your portal into this hidden architecture, and once you look inside, nothing will feel safe again.
The ledger is only the beginning. It is a window into a system so vast, so meticulously constructed, that it almost defies comprehension. Each entry is more than a number. It is a life, a story, a suppressed truth. And the most chilling part? Those in power do not see cruelty as cruelty. They see efficiency. They see control. They see the quiet consolidation of power through the erasure of what they deem expendable. The pattern is undeniable. Children like Celeste vanish. Accounts are adjusted. Symbols quietly mark the transition from life to ledger. No one asks too many questions. No one searches too thoroughly. The system has trained everyone to ignore the anomalies, to focus on the mundane, and to rationalize away the missing. Indifference becomes institutionalized. Silence becomes obedience. Now consider the mechanics of this control. It is not just the physical confines of the plantation, the fields, the house. It is psychological. The fear is subtle, creeping, invisible. Staff, overseers, even family members are manipulated by routine, hierarchy, and the omnipresent gaze of authority. Each person internalizes their role, unconsciously policing themselves and each other. Obedience is rewarded, curiosity punished. And through this, the invisible architecture of oppression maintains itself, undetected by those who accept the world as it is. This is why Lily's silence matters. She speaks without words. Every glance, every drawing, every carefully observed detail is testimony. She sees what others ignore. She exists in the cracks of perception where truth hides. And in doing so, she becomes the living countermeasure to the system's attempt to erase her existence. She embodies the knowledge they do not want recorded, knowledge that threatens their invisible empire. Understand this. Systems of power always require blind spots. They rely on the unwillingness or inability of people to notice the small, subtle discrepancies. A ledger entry, a missing child, a quiet drawing left behind in charcoal. To break these systems, you must train your vision to perceive these blind spots, to read between the lines, to notice the things that are never meant to be noticed. And now, pause. Let the weight of this realization sink in. Comment once more,
"I see the hidden" twice if you haven't yet. It is not a ritual, it is a declaration, a mark of awareness. You are now a witness to the machinery of unseen control, and with that witness comes responsibility. Beneath the grand floorboards of Belishas, Lily was not an accident. She was a consequence, a shadow cast by deliberate orchestration. Think carefully about this. Her concealment was not the result of chance. Every missing child, every unnoticed absence, every ledger entry adjusted with surgical precision is part of a method, a hidden design. The night Celeste disappeared, the storm that raged over Louisiana, was not just a natural event, it was a cover. Trees toppled, rivers swelled, winds tore across the cane fields, chaos designed to obscure human action. In that darkness, new overseer Silas Croft executed a sequence so exact that it left no witnesses and no trace, except in the small carved wooden birds, a signature of the system's cruelty disguised as innocence. Those symbols were meant to be ignored, overlooked, written off as child's play. Lily's presence is proof of the system's failure, or perhaps its arrogance. She survived not because of kindness, but because no one expected her to. She lived in the liminal space, the cracks beneath the foundation, where the machinery of control does not reach, where the overlooked can quietly exist. But she is not powerless. Her silence is her weapon. Her observations, her drawings, her eyes, they are evidence, a living ledger of what the system cannot admit. Consider the psychology at work here. Armand Vauclin, a man of sharp calculation, sees humans as units of value. To him, a child missing is a numeric adjustment, a minor inconvenience in the calculus of wealth and control. He believes efficiency is morality. And yet, here is Lily, defying his system, occupying a space that should not exist, turning the very act of being into rebellion. This is a lesson in power. True control does not rely on brute force alone. It relies on invisibility, on normalization, on ensuring that everyone participates in the maintenance of the system, knowingly or unknowingly. The silence of the community, the resignation of Adelaide, the pragmatism of Thibodeau, all contribute to the invisible infrastructure of oppression. Now, let this settle. Comment below, "I see the hidden" again, and type it twice. This is more than engagement. It is an acknowledgement, a step deeper into awareness, a recognition that observing the machinery is the first act of breaking it.
The network that allowed Lily to exist beneath Belishas was not accidental. It was woven over decades, hidden in plain sight. Each worker, each overseer, each ledger entry, and each quiet resignation was a thread in a tapestry of control. The machinery of this plantation, and others like it, did not rely solely on violence. Violence is too obvious. True power thrives in silence, in routine, in the normalized acts that no one questions. Look closely at the people around her, Nettie, Adelaide, Thibodeau. They are cogs in the mechanism, each with varying degrees of awareness and complicity. Nettie, protective yet limited by her status, functions within survival. Adelaide, educated, cultured, even gentle, is constrained by societal expectation, by fear of confronting the system she inhabits. Thibodeau, the law itself, bends toward order rather than justice. Every one of them perpetuates the environment that allows children to vanish without consequence. And this is the system's genius. It is invisible to those who benefit from it, and nearly invisible to those who do not. Armand Vauclin sees efficiency.
The enslaved community adapts to survive. Outsiders assume morality is present. But in reality, the plantation is a microcosm of a larger, timeless network. Human lives quantified, normalized, and erased. Ledger entries like arrows pointing to invisible horrors. Symbols like the wooden birds marking the unspoken truth. Consider the depth of Lily's survival. Her isolation was both her imprisonment and her shield. She learned, observed, absorbed, without trust, without exposure. In a world designed to erase her, she became an archive. Every movement of the overseers, every whisper of the household, every shadow that passed above her was recorded in her consciousness. She became a living witness, a testament to the system's failures and its horrors. Now internalize this. The machinery is always present, often unnoticed. The silent observers, the ones who record, remember, and resist in subtle ways, are rare. Lily is one. She is proof that even in oppressive structures, agency can survive in forms that are unrecognized and underestimated. Before we descend further, lock this in. Comment, "I see the hidden" twice more. This repetition is not ritual, it is recognition. Recognition is power. Recognition awakens awareness. Recognition begins the transformation of the mind.
The ledger is more than a book. It is a map of human disappearance, a blueprint of controlled oblivion. Each entry, precise and clinical, conceals a story no one dared tell. Numbers become names, dates become fates, and symbols, tiny, almost innocent, become markers of erasure. The hand-drawn bird, repeated like a whispered signature, is not just a child's art. It is proof of comprehension, an intuitive grasp of the system's cruelty. Lily understood what adults around her refused to confront. Life and death were catalogued like commodities. What Armand did was systematic. He did not kill carelessly. He erased efficiently. Losses were adjusted, disappearances sanitized, the machinery of commerce untainted by human suffering. In this world, horror is not loud, it is hidden in sight plain, normalized to the point that it becomes invisible. The silent, careful notation of a missing child is more terrifying than screams because it demonstrates control. Absolute, total, unchallenged control over life itself. But Lily, in her quiet, impossible existence beneath the floorboards, subverted it. Her silence, her observation, her drawings, they were acts of resistance. Every mark on paper, every careful recreation of events she witnessed was a record outside the ledger. A record not sanctioned by authority, not subject to adjustment or erasure. She became a living ledger of truth, a witness who could not be fully owned, catalogued, or dismissed. Notice the mechanics here. The system relies on invisibility and compartmentalization. No one notices what they don't want to see. The enslaved and the powerful alike are trapped in roles that blind them. Yet within that blindness, awareness can take root in subtle, profound ways. Lily's existence proves this. The smallest presence, unnoticed, can hold the entire truth of a corrupt system in balance. Now, let's consider the psychological calculus at play. Armand's cold precision, Adelaide's careful propriety, Thibodeau's legal pragmatism, Nettie's survival strategies, all of these are tools of control. They form a lattice of human behavior designed to sustain power. Within it, Lily exists as an anomaly, a variable outside the expected equation. And it is that anomaly that will unravel the quiet narrative of disappearance, showing the fragile underside of absolute authority. Pause, reflect, comment,
I see the hidden, twice. Anchor this awareness in your mind. The recognition of systems unseen is not passive. It is the first step in reclaiming agency. Next, we descend into the mechanisms that allowed a child to vanish unnoticed and the terrifying calculations that permitted life to be so casually overwritten.
The story beneath Bellichasse Plantation is not one of mere neglect. It is one of deliberate orchestration. Every creaking floorboard, every shadowed crawl space, every ledger entry was part of a structure built to maintain control. Lily's survival was never supposed to happen. She was not simply lost, she was unaccounted for by design. And yet, the very architecture meant to conceal her, walls, earth, secrecy, became her sanctuary. Consider the plantation itself, a microcosm of dominance, an ecosystem of hierarchy where power is both tangible and invisible. Armand's empire ran on fear and silence, fear of punishment, fear of speaking, fear of observation. Silence enforced by social expectation, by the weight of a ledger, by the oppressive gaze of authority. Yet, Lily's silence was different. It was defiance. She observed, absorbed, and documented. She was the only participant not fully assimilated into the system, the only mind capable of holding truth in opposition to structure. This is where history hides its most dangerous lessons. Systems that seem orderly, efficient, and rational often rely on moral blindness. Life and death, liberty and constraint, compassion and cruelty, they can all be subjected to the cold arithmetic of control. Armand, in his meticulous records, treated human beings as numbers. But numbers cannot capture experience, awareness, or witness. And Lily, in the shadows beneath his house, was the living proof that human consciousness can survive, even thrive, outside the ledger's constraints. Now look deeper. The child's existence reveals the invisible consequences of privilege and power. Those who make decisions from above rarely see the downstream impact. The enslaved community knew, in fragments and whispers, yet lacked the authority to intervene. The overseer enforced the master's will, and the system itself neutralized empathy. Each adult, no matter how good or concerned, becomes complicit in perpetuating horror simply by existing inside the structure. Understand this, history is full of invisible witnesses. Children, outsiders, marginalized voices, those who inhabit the periphery often hold the clearest reflection of corruption. Lily was a mirror that could not be shattered, a silent conscience imposed upon the system, and her drawings, her observations, her mere survival were acts of defiance more profound than rebellion itself. Comment, I see the hidden, twice now. Let it root in your mind. Recognition is the first act of resistance. In the next section, we will uncover how the plantation's physical and psychological architecture was designed to erase identity, and why a single unnoticed presence could threaten it all. Beneath Bellichasse, the architecture itself became a weapon of psychological control. The floors above were polished, elegant, commanding respect and obedience. Below, the hidden crawl spaces were dark, suffocating, and alive with the scent of damp earth and decay. These spaces were not accidents, they were deliberate. Spaces where human presence could be minimized, ignored, or entirely erased. They were the physical manifestation of invisibility, the perfect tool for those who wanted certain lives forgotten. Consider how Lily adapted. She was forced to navigate a world designed to hide her, to erase her existence. Every sound became a guide, every shadow a friend or threat.
Survival in such a realm is not just physical, it is a lesson in acute awareness, in understanding the rules of a system that does not recognize your humanity. She learned to anticipate, to observe without being seen, and in that awareness she gained power, a form of knowledge denied to those above, who assumed that the child beneath their house was nothing, less than nothing. Power is always connected to information. Armand had authority because he controlled knowledge, who lives, who dies, who is counted, and who is ignored. But knowledge also has limits. The system he built assumed that anyone outside it could be dismissed, overlooked. Yet a single mind, fully alert, fully observing, can undermine even the most rigid hierarchies. Lily's silent presence was a destabilizing force, a challenge to the narrative carefully curated above. The child's survival also exposes the moral bankruptcy embedded in systems of control. It is not only the actions of oppressors that define injustice, but the omissions, the things left unexamined, the people left unseen. The plantation's veneer of civility masks decades of calculated neglect. Every unreported disappearance, every unnoticed child, every ledger adjustment that erases a name, all of it is a mechanism of control. Lily simply existed outside it. Her silence and observation became a mirror of truth that could not be dismissed. Now, understand this. Systems that prioritize power over humanity always leave cracks. These cracks are where the truth persists, where resistance takes root, where awareness awakens. Lily was that crack, small, invisible, yet profound. And what she witnessed would one day reveal the hidden machinery that perpetuates cruelty in ways most people cannot fathom. Comment "I see the hidden" twice again to seal your awareness. The world you think you know is only the surface. In the next section, we will descend into the hidden ledger itself, the silent language of power, profit, and human erasure, recorded in precise, terrifying detail.